Rain fell in thin silver needles over Montmartre, the kind of relentless Paris drizzle that blurred neon lights into streaks of red and blue. A narrow alley, barely wide enough for two people to walk shoulder to shoulder, had become a theatre of death. At its centre lay the still body of a man in a dark jacket, head twisted at an unnatural angle, one arm stretched toward the stone wall as though trying to claw his way back to life. Inspector Léon Marchand stood under a black umbrella, watching water collect in shallow pools around the corpse. He had seen too many bodies in his 20 years with the Paris police judiciaire, but something about this one gnawed at him. Maybe it was the face, a mixture of surprise and betrayal frozen beneath half-closed eyelids. Maybe it was the location. This alley was not known for murder. Petty theft, yes. Lovers' quarrels often. But murder, that was new. The hum of police radios filled the night air, sharp bursts of static breaking through the sound of rain. A crime scene photographer moved like a ghost, snapping pictures while officers pushed back curious onlookers gathering near the mouth of the alley. Marchand knelt beside the body, careful not to let his coat touch the wet ground. The victim's fingers clutched a crumpled scrap of paper. He pulled on a pair of gloves, pried it free, and flattened it under the glow of a street lamp. Two words in smudged ink stared back at him. "She knows." The inspector's jaw tightened. "Who found him?" he asked without looking up. A young officer stepped forward. "Local shopkeeper, sir. Said she heard shouting about 20 minutes before midnight. By the time she looked out, the man was already on the ground. No one else around. ID?" The officer shook his head. "No wallet. No phone. Nothing." Marchand studied the dead man's features. Early 30s, dark hair plastered to his forehead by rain, stubble on his jaw. A guidebook peeked from his satchel, pages swollen from water. Paris landmarks, English text. Marchand flipped through it, pausing at a folded map marked with circles around tourist spots. The Eiffel Tower, the Catacombs, Sacré-Cœur. A tour guide, perhaps. But the note, "She knows," suggested something beyond a simple robbery gone wrong. The inspector rose slowly, back protesting with the movement. "Get this to forensics," he said, handing the paper to the nearest officer. "And canvass the area. Someone must have seen him earlier tonight. Find out who he was." The photographer finished his work. Two paramedics waited at the alley's edge with a stretcher, faces impassive under dripping hoods. Marchand lingered, staring at the dead man one last time. Rain trickled down the collar of his coat, cold against his skin. Cases like this always began the same way. A body, a question, and a weight in his gut that told him life was about to get complicated. He turned to leave when the shopkeeper, a woman in her 50s, scarf pulled tight against the wind, approached hesitantly. "Inspector," she said, voice trembling. "I saw him earlier tonight." "He wasn't alone," Marchand paused. "Who was with him?" "A young woman, blonde, tourist, I think." They looked upset. The inspector's eyes flicked back to the body, then to the note in the officer's hand. "She knows." A woman, a secret, a dead man in the rain. Marchand straightened, gaze sweeping over the narrow alley, the shuttered windows above. The endless Paris night pressing in. "Find her," he said quietly. And with that, the hunt began. Morning light crept over Paris like a reluctant secret. The rain had washed the streets clean, leaving the city glistening under a pale winter sun. Somewhere across the Seine, the cathedral bells tolled 9 times, marking the hour when the story of Claire Reynolds began to tangle with the corpse in Montmartre. She didn't know it yet, of course. To her, Paris was still a dream, one she had saved 3 years to afford. At 28, with a job in Chicago that kept her behind a desk and a fiancé who had broken off their engagement 6 months before, this trip was supposed to be hers alone, a way to reclaim something. Maybe freedom, maybe courage. Claire had arrived 2 days earlier with a backpack, a guidebook, and a list of sites scribbled in neat handwriting. She stayed at a modest hostel near the Latin Quarter, a place that smelled faintly of coffee and damp laundry. And then there was Julien Moreau. She met him on her first evening in Paris, outside a cafe where she struggled to order in halting French. He had stepped in smoothly, translated with a grin, and paid for her espresso before she could protest. "Paris can be complicated," he said in accented English, handing her the cup. "I'm Julien. I show visitors the real city, not just the postcards. Something about him, his easy charm, the way he leaned against the railing like he owned the night, made her agree when he offered to give her a private tour the next day. They met again that morning at Place du Tertre, where artists painted beneath awnings and accordion music floated through the air. Julian wore a dark scarf and carried himself with the casual elegance only Parisians seemed born with. "So," Claire said, clutching her camera. "What's first?" He smiled, eyes glinting. "Not the Eiffel Tower, too obvious. We begin with the hidden Paris." As they walked, he led her through crooked streets lined with centuries-old buildings, narrating stories of poets, painters, and revolutions. His voice wrapped around her like cigarette smoke. Smooth, faintly dangerous. "See this door?" he said, pausing before a weathered wooden entrance marked with iron studs. During the occupation, resistance fighters met here, risked their lives for messages slipped under the threshold. Claire snapped a photo. "You know a lot of history." "I know a lot of secrets," he said, and for a moment, something unreadable flickered across his face. They stopped for crepes near Sacré-Cœur, where the city sprawled beneath them in a grey and gold haze. Claire felt a flutter she hadn't expected. Part attraction, part unease. "You give tours for a living?" she asked between bites. "Among other things," Julian replied, eyes drifting toward the crowded square. "Paris is expensive. One must be resourceful." She wondered what that meant but didn't press. People had layers. She had come here to forget hers. The afternoon stretched into evening. Julian showed her corners of Paris she would never have found alone. Hidden courtyards, a bookstore older than her country, a jazz bar where the lights stayed low and the wine flowed cheap. By the time they returned to the Latin Quarter, night had folded itself over the rooftops. The streets glistened again with fresh drizzle. "Tomorrow," he said, handing her a slip of paper with an address, "I will show you the catacombs. Most tourists only see the entrance. I know another way." Something in his tone made it sound like an invitation to a secret. Claire tucked the paper into her bag. "Same time?" He nodded, smiled. "Same time." As he disappeared into the rain-slicked streets, Claire felt a thrill she hadn't known in years, a sense of stepping into a story larger than herself. She didn't see the man watching from across the square, face hidden beneath a hood, eyes fixed on the blonde tourist and the charming guide who had just walked away. Tomorrow would not go as planned. Morning crept into Claire's hostel room through slatted blinds, a pale grey light brushing across her bed. For a moment, she stayed still, caught between sleep and waking, the sounds of Paris drifting up from the street below, motorbikes, voices, the clink of dishes from the cafe on the corner. She stretched, yawned, and reached for her phone on the nightstand. That was when she noticed the open zipper on her bag. A small, ordinary thing, yet it landed in her stomach like a stone. She sat up, blinked hard. Her wallet was there, camera too. But when she searched the inner pocket where she always kept it, her heart skipped. The passport was gone. She emptied the bag onto the bed. Clothes, toiletries, guidebook, charger cables. No slim navy blue booklet anywhere. "Come on," she muttered, shaking out each item as if the document might tumble free. Nothing. A wave of cold panic rose in her chest. A stolen passport in a foreign country wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a trap. Without it, she couldn't board a plane, couldn't leave France. Julian's slip of paper lay crumpled near the window, the catacombs address scrawled in black ink. Her first thought wasn't suspicion, not yet. Instead, her mind went to the cleaning lady she'd passed in the hall the evening before, or maybe another guest. The hostel had thin walls, shared bathrooms. Anyone could have slipped in. But as she packed her things back up, one memory pushed forward. The way Julian had glanced over his shoulder last night, scanning the square before walking away. Why had he done that? At the reception desk, a man with greying hair and a sweater patched at the elbows looked up from his newspaper. "Excuse me," Claire said, voice tighter than she meant. "Has anyone turned in a passport? American?" He shook his head slowly. "Non, mademoiselle." "You have lost it. Stolen, maybe. I don't know." He spread his hands. "Perhaps you call the embassy," she nodded, thanked him, but the word stolen kept echoing. Stolen meant deliberate. Stolen meant someone had taken it for a reason. She found Julian outside the cafe where they had first met. He leaned against the railing, smoking, collar turned up against the wind. "Julian," she said, breathless from half running. "My passport, it's gone." He frowned, cigarette pausing midway to his lips. "Gone? How?" "I don't know. I woke up, it wasn't there." He exhaled smoke, studying her face. The hostel. People come and go. Maybe a thief. Maybe, she said slowly. But they didn't take anything else. A small silence stretched between them, filled by the hiss of passing cars. You think I took it? Julian said at last, voice low. No, she said quickly, though the thought had crept in uninvited. I don't know what to think. His expression softened, or seemed to. We'll fix it. After the catacombs. I help you call the embassy, yes? I know someone who works there. A friend. The word felt slippery. That afternoon, they rode the metro south, the tunnels reeking of metal and electricity. Claire kept checking her bag, as if the passport might somehow reappear. It didn't. At Denfert Rochereau station, where the catacombs entrance waited beneath a sky bruised with approaching rain, Julian bought 2 tickets, handed one to her with a faint smile. We find answers, he said. But as they descended into the earth, past walls lined with centuries-old bones, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping deeper into something she didn't understand. Something dark, with teeth, and the man beside her held more secrets than he let on. The air grew colder as they descended. Stone steps spiraled downward into the earth, the sound of dripping water echoing through the tunnel. Claire clutched the metal railing, heart hammering, as the daylight above shrank to a coin-sized memory. Around her, tourists spoke in hushed voices, footsteps crunching on damp gravel. But Julian walked like he belonged here. Most people only see the pretty parts, he said over his shoulder. His voice bounced off the walls, a ghost among ghosts. The main route, the safe one, but there are miles of tunnels beyond the map. Whole worlds under Paris. Claire adjusted her backpack, her missing passport a constant weight in her mind. And you've been in them? Many times. He smiled faintly, as if at a private joke. When I was younger, we came down here to drink, to hide from police sometimes, to disappear for a while. That flicker of unease returned. She studied the back of his neck, the way his shoulders carried a tension he tried to hide. Why would you need to hide from police? She asked. Julian didn't answer right away. The group moved into a chamber where skulls and femurs formed intricate walls, stacked like grotesque bricks. Candlelight from guide lanterns painted everything in gold and shadow. Life was complicated, he said finally. My brother, he made mistakes, owed money to people, bad people. And you? He met her eyes. Sometimes family pulls you into things whether you want it or not. They walked in silence for a while, the ceiling low enough that Julian had to duck in places. The tunnels smelled of earth and time, centuries pressing close. Claire tried to imagine living down here, hiding among the bones. Does your brother still live in Paris? She asked. Julian's mouth twitched. If you can call it living. He disappears for months, then comes back needing favors, money, connections. The words carried a bitterness she hadn't heard before. One of the official guides motioned for the group to pause, giving a speech about how 6 million Parisians were buried here. Tourists snapped photos, flashbulbs scattering light across hollow eye sockets. Claire kept watching Julian instead. Were you close? She asked softly. He looked at the floor. We were once, before the debts. Before he got me involved? Involved in what? Julian didn't answer. The tour moved on, deeper into the maze. Claire's unease sharpened with each turn. There was something in Julian's silences, in the way he scanned the darker side tunnels as though expecting someone, or something, to emerge. Finally, as they entered a narrow corridor lined with bones arranged in patterns like flowers, he spoke again. When I was 20, he said quietly, my brother asked me to hold on to something for him, just for a night. Said it was nothing illegal. I believed him. Claire waited. It was stolen jewelry, he continued, worth thousands. Police raided my apartment the next day. I spent 6 months in prison. Her stomach knotted. That's a big thing to leave out, she said. He gave a humorless laugh. People prefer the tour guide with charming stories, not the ex-con. Why tell me now? Julian stopped walking. The rest of the group drifted ahead, their voices fading. Only the 2 of them remained in the flickering half-light. Because, he said slowly, sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, and sometimes debts come back. There was something in his tone that made her pulse quicken. A warning? A confession? Before she could ask more, a man in a hooded jacket appeared at the far end of the corridor, leaning against the wall as if waiting. Julian stiffened almost imperceptibly, then started walking again, guiding Claire back toward the main group. Who was that? She whispered. No one, Julian said too quickly. but his shoulders stayed tense, and he kept glancing behind them until they finally climbed back into daylight. The Paris sky bruised with rain clouds. Claire didn't know it yet, but this was the first crack, the place where Julian's secrets began to spill through, one by one, until everything collapsed. The first raindrops began to fall as Claire left the catacombs. The sky over Paris had turned the colour of slate, clouds heavy and low, pressing the city beneath their weight. She pulled her jacket tight, the damp air seeping through fabric and skin alike. Julian walked beside her, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, silent since they'd climbed the last steps into daylight. That silence had grown heavier with every block they walked. "You okay?" Claire asked finally, her voice hesitant. He gave a thin smile. "Just tired. Long day." But the words lacked conviction. Something gnawed at him. She could feel it, a tension radiating from him like heat from a wire about to snap. They reached the busy corner of Rue des Abbesses, neon signs flickering against puddled streets. Julian's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, face tightening, then stepped a few paces away. Claire lingered by a lamppost, rain dripping from her hair, pretending to scroll through photos on her camera while his voice carried faintly over the traffic. "You can't keep calling me like this," he hissed in rapid French. "I said I'd get you the money. Tonight." The reply was muffled but sharp, angry enough that Julian flinched. "She doesn't know," he snapped back. "I said she doesn't—" He stopped suddenly, lowering his voice. "No, she won't be a problem. I'll handle it." Claire froze. "She doesn't know." The words hit like ice water. Julian turned, saw her watching. For half a heartbeat their eyes locked, his widening in realization, hers narrowing in dawning comprehension. He ended the call abruptly, shoving the phone into his pocket. Rain slid down his face, indistinguishable from sweat. "Who was that?" Claire asked, voice brittle. "No one," he said too quickly. "Don't lie to me." Julian exhaled sharply, glancing around as if the buildings themselves might be listening. "Just someone I owe money to. It's nothing." "Nothing?" Her pulse hammered. "You said my passport was stolen. You've been helping me." He hesitated. That half second told her everything. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It was you, Claire. You took it, didn't you?" Her voice cracked. "My passport? You stole it." Rain pounded harder now, plastering her hair to her cheeks. People hurried past under umbrellas, the city rushing on, indifferent to the collapse happening in its streets. Julian stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I didn't want to involve you. It was just supposed to buy me time." "Time for what?" He looked away, jaw tight. "To pay them back. They threatened my brother. Me. I didn't have cash, and foreigners. Passports are worth something." Claire stared at him, nausea twisting through her. The charming guide, the man who had shown her Paris's hidden corners, had sold her identity like currency. "You used me," she said softly, the words tasting like ash. Julian reached for her arm. "I was going to get it back before you even knew." She jerked away. "Don't touch me." For a moment, only the rain spoke, drumming on awnings, on parked cars, on the pavement, running with water like veins. Claire's chest heaved. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but fury. Julian looked desperate now, words spilling fast. "I didn't have a choice. These people, if I don't pay them, they'll kill me. They'll kill my brother." "And me?" she snapped. "What about me?" He had no answer. The silence between them grew jagged, cutting deeper than any shouted accusation. Finally, Julian murmured, "I can fix this tonight. Meet me after dark. I'll make it right." Claire turned away, rain blurring Paris into streaks of grey. She didn't know yet if she believed him, but she knew one thing. Nothing about this night would end the way it began. Rain had intensified by evening, washing Rue des Abbesses in slick reflections of neon signs and streetlights. The cobblestones glimmered like wet glass under Claire's boots, each step echoing in the narrow street. She kept her umbrella low, shielding herself more from the city's gaze than the rain itself. Her fingers clutched the strap of her bag, the memory of her stolen passport burning at the back of her mind. Julian waited near a cafe with shuttered windows, hands deep in his coat pockets, his posture rigid. When he saw her approach, his face softened into a tentative smile, but Claire could see the tension beneath. Something in him was poised to snap. "You came," he said, voice almost casual. Claire stopped, letting the rain slide down her face. I had to know. How much of what you said was true? Julian's eyes darted around, then back to her. Everything I said. Mostly. I didn't want you dragged into— You stole my passport, Claire cut in sharply, voice trembling. You lied. You manipulated me. The words hung between them like lightning, sharp and electric. Pedestrians hurried past, umbrellas bobbing in the street, but none seemed to notice the drama unfolding on the slick cobblestones. I had no choice. Julian's voice rose, frustration and fear colliding. If I didn't pay them, they'd— Kill your brother? Claire interrupted, voice cold, eyes narrowing. And that justified using me. Julian ran a hand through his soaked hair. I didn't want to hurt you. I was trying to protect you from the danger I brought with me. You brought it. Her words cracked, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. You lied to me, used me, and— He stepped closer, pleading. Claire, listen. If I don't get the money tonight, my brother— They'll— She recoiled. Don't come near me. You don't get to touch me after this. For a long moment, the rain drowned the city in sound. Their breaths came fast, uneven, mingling with the drizzle. The street seemed smaller, tighter, as though the buildings themselves were pressing in, holding witness to betrayal. Why? Claire whispered finally, voice breaking. Why me? Why my trust? Julian's shoulders sagged. Because I thought you were different. Because you cared. Because I didn't know what else to do. She laughed bitterly, a sound that was half despair. Cared? You mean used? You tricked me with smiles, stories, secrets. You made me feel like I was part of something. Real. His face twisted with guilt. I didn't think it would get this far. I didn't think— You didn't think, Claire repeated, venom in her tone. And now we're here. Now everything's ruined, and your lies are all I have to remember you by. Julian opened his mouth again, but no words came. The rain fell harder, drumming on rooftops, on the pavement, on the metal railing beside them. It filled the gaps in conversation, amplifying the tension, giving gravity to every pause. You made a choice, she said softly, almost to herself, and now I have to make mine. His eyes flicked to hers, fear surfacing. Claire, please. But she had already turned away, boots splashing in puddles, the neon reflections rippling like fractured glass beneath her. Julian reached out instinctively, then let his arm fall. He knew there was nothing he could say that would undo the betrayal. The alley ahead loomed, darker and narrower than the main street. A thin fog began curling around the lampposts, shrouding the cobblestones in a silvery haze. Claire's heart pounded with anticipation and dread. She didn't see the edge of the alley where the next moment would spiral beyond argument and fear. She didn't know that. Julian's desperation and her rage would collide in ways neither could control, and in that quiet before the storm, the city itself seemed to hold its breath. The rain pounded relentlessly, turning the narrow alley into a slick corridor of glistening cobblestones. Claire's boots splashed in shallow puddles as she followed Julian, heart hammering. The neon glow from Rue des Abbesses barely reached this place, shadows curling around the walls like fingers. She had wanted answers, confrontation, closure, but now each step toward the alley's darkness felt like stepping into a trap. Julian's shoulders were tense, jaw tight. He glanced behind them as though expecting someone or something to appear from the fog. Claire, wait, he said, voice low, strained. We can fix this. I can— No! She cut him off sharply, rain dripping from her hair into her eyes. No more lies, no more excuses. Her hand clenched the strap of her bag, knuckles white. The stolen passport, the manipulation, the deception. It all swirled in her mind like the storm above. He stopped, raising his hands slightly. I didn't want it to get this far. I never wanted— You never wanted. Her voice rose, echoing against the brick walls. You used me, Julian. You sold my passport. You dragged me into your mess. And now I'm supposed to trust you. Julian swallowed hard, gaze flicking toward a dark recess in the alley. I thought I could protect you. I thought I was helping you. Helping me? She spat, her words sharp as shards. You've been lying the entire time. Everything you said was a story to cover your tracks. The alley seemed to shrink around them. Water ran in rivulets along the edges, carrying reflections of fractured neon lights. A stray cat darted across the cobblestones, disappearing into the shadows. Julian stepped closer, voice almost pleading. Claire, listen, there's no one else, just us. Let me fix this, just for tonight. She shook her head violently. No, I trusted you. I believed in you. And now? Her breath hitched. Now I don't know what I believe anymore. He reached out instinctively, but she flinched, taking a step back. The tension was unbearable, a living thing between them, thick as the rain. I didn't know who else to turn to, he murmured. You lied to me, she said, voice low, trembling. You took my life into your hands, and I had no idea. Her chest heaved. The betrayal cut deeper than fear, sharper than the cold Paris wind. Julian's face twisted with guilt. I thought you'd understand if you knew everything. You thought, Claire's words rang like a whip. You never thought about me, about what this meant for me. A puddle reflected her eyes, wide and furious, and for a heartbeat, she imagined the storm swallowing everything. Julian, the alley, the lies. Rage surged through her like fire, uncontrolled and consuming. Julian took another step forward, cautiously, almost pleading. I can make it right. You can't, she interrupted. Her hands shook. Adrenaline made her movements jerky, erratic. She grabbed a nearby glass bottle, slick with rain, and raised it instinctively. Julian froze, eyes widening. Claire, wait! Don't! His voice cracked, panicked. She didn't hear him. Every memory, every deception, every stolen moment boiled into one explosive reaction. She swung. The bottle connected with a sickening crack. Julian stumbled, blood mixing with rain on the cold cobblestones. He fell to the ground, clutching his face, eyes wide with shock. The alley seemed to pause, the city holding its breath. Water ran in red-streaked puddles. The sound of distant sirens was faint at first, then closer, an approaching inevitability. Claire dropped the bottle, hands trembling, rain plastering her hair to her face. She knelt beside him, the truth of her actions catching up faster than she could comprehend. She whispered almost to herself, "What have I done?" Julian gasped, blood bubbling at his lips, eyes flicking to hers. "Claire, The first wail of police sirens cut through the alley, sharp and final. She looked around, alone and drenched, staring at the man who had betrayed her, lying in the rain-slicked alley. And in that instant she realized nothing could undo the night, nothing could bring back trust, and nothing could erase what had just happened. The shadows of Montmartre pressed closer, swallowing the alley in grey and red. Somewhere, the city continued indifferent as sirens grew louder, and the storm refused to let up. Rain continued to fall, softer now, dripping from the eaves of shuttered buildings onto the cobblestones. Claire sat on the edge of the alley, her hands slick with water and blood, staring at Julian's motionless form. The city's distant hum felt unreal, as if Paris had paused to watch what had just unfolded. She could barely breathe, chest tight, heart hammering in a rhythm she didn't recognize. Somewhere above, a faint flash of lightning illuminated the alley, revealing the torn collar of Julian's jacket and the dark streaks across his face. His eyes fluttered open briefly, confusion and pain mingling in their gaze. Claire recoiled instinctively. "Oh God," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please, don't," he coughed, blood mingling with rain on his lips. "Claire, I never meant—" Tears blurred her vision. "I didn't mean to. Her words stumbled, falling into the wet night. Rage, fear, and remorse tangled inside her like the currents in the gutters. She pressed her hands to her face, shivering, the reality of what she had done settling like a stone in her stomach. The alley was quiet, too quiet. The distant echo of footsteps approached, cautious, then hurried. Claire's eyes darted toward the sound, panic spiking. She realized she couldn't stay here, not with the consequences pressing down like the rain. A stray cat darted from a shadowed doorway, its eyes reflecting the streetlights, and Claire followed its movement without thinking. She staggered to her feet, dripping wet, boots leaving prints in the blood-mixed puddles. Every instinct screamed to run, yet part of her froze, anchored by guilt and fear. The sound of sirens grew louder, shrill against the wet stones. Police lights painted the walls in alternating red and blue streaks, casting long, distorted shadows. Claire backed into a corner, hands trembling, hoping to become invisible, hoping somehow the moment could vanish into the mist. A voice called out sharply, "Mademoiselle!" "Step away from the body!" Claire's stomach lurched. She wanted to scream, to tell them it was an accident, to explain. But words failed her. Her lips moved silently, forming confessions she could not utter aloud. The officer's flashlight cut through the mist, illuminating her soaked form. She could see his eyes narrowing, suspicion mounting. She tried to steady her breathing, telling herself this wasn't the end yet. There was still a chance, some thread she could follow to untangle the chaos. But the weight of what had happened pressed down on her, heavy as the rain, cold as the alley stones beneath her feet. Julian coughed again, a weak, rasping sound that made her stomach twist. The realization hit her fully. She couldn't undo the night. Nothing could bring back trust. Nothing could erase the betrayal, and nothing could save the man she had hurt in a storm of anger and fear. The sirens grew deafening. The alley no longer just a narrow corridor, but a stage where consequences had already claimed their place. Claire stood trembling, rain soaking her to the bone, staring at the red and blue flashes reflecting in the wet cobblestones. Her mind raced. She tried to recall the events leading here, the stolen passport, Julian's lies, the catacombs, but each memory collided with guilt, fear, and disbelief. The story she had entered Paris with had fractured into something unrecognizable, something dangerous. Somewhere behind the flashing lights, she could hear officers directing others, asking questions, their voices sharp, insistent. The world outside the alley continued, indifferent to her fear, her mistakes, her rage. Claire's hands shook violently as she realized there was no way to undo the choices that had led her here. Rain ran down her face, mingling with tears, blood, and the grime of the alley. She pressed herself against the wall, listening to Julian's shallow breaths, counting them, trying to hold on to the fragile thread between life and death. The city roared softly around her, sirens weaving through the night, shadows shifting in the storm, and Claire felt the first, unbearable weight of knowing that nothing, no apology, no explanation, no act, could ever turn back time. The morning after the alley incident brought a grey, heavy sky over Montmartre. Rain had stopped, leaving streets slick and reflective, the city seeming smaller, quieter, weighed down by wet fog. Inspector Léon Marchand arrived at the scene, trenchcoat damp, umbrella folded under his arm. The alley had been cleared of bodies and tape, but the memory of the night lingered like smoke that refused to dissipate. He crouched beside the pool of rainwater, where Julian's blood had mixed with the street. Forensics had taken fingerprints, photographs, and swabs, but Marchand knew the puzzle wasn't in the blood alone. It was in the interactions, the betrayals, the secrets that would surface in time. "Morning, Inspector," Officer Fournier said, handing over a notebook. "We interviewed the hostel staff, neighbors, and a few tourists who were around. No one saw anything useful." Marchand frowned, flipping through the notes. "And the young woman?" "She's registered at the hostel," Fournier replied. "American, blonde, Claire Reynolds. She's missing. They haven't located her yet." Marchand pinched the bridge of his nose, thoughts already assembling pieces he hadn't seen before. A murdered guide, a missing tourist, a stolen passport, and the alley that had become a stage for rage and betrayal. It all started to take shape, a sketch of events with missing lines he needed to fill. He walked the alley slowly, noting shadows, angles, and escape routes. Cobblestones were wet, reflecting the morning light. Trash bins, fire escapes, and narrow doors, every potential hiding place or witness point catalogued in his mind. The city itself was a participant, every wall a silent observer of human failings. Marchand's gaze fell on the corner where witnesses had mentioned seeing Claire and Julian earlier. He crouched, tracing water stains and scuff marks, imagining the confrontation in reverse, reconstructing each movement. Each detail was a thread, and he needed to pull them carefully, lest they unravel the truth. Back at the station, Marchand laid out the evidence on the table. Photos of the alley, statements from witnesses, hotel logs, and the torn note found in Julian's hand. He read the two words repeatedly, letting their implications sink in. She knows. He called in a colleague, Detective Morel. "We need a timeline of her movements, where she went, who she met. We need to locate Claire Reynolds before anything else happens." Morel nodded. "I've contacted the embassy and airlines. She hasn't checked in anywhere. No flights, no calls. She's still in Paris." Marchand leaned back, studying the photograph of Julian, blood streaking his face. Something about it gnawed at him, the mixture of fear and betrayal frozen in his expression. He didn't know yet the full story, the complexities of the tourist and the guide, the stolen passport, or the underground threats that had drawn them into the alley. He pinched the bridge of his nose, thinking. Paris was a city of layers, tourists and locals, history above and below, secrets hidden in narrow streets and catacombs. To solve this, he needed to navigate every layer, tease out motives, uncover every connection. A faint knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Fournier entered with a printout. "We traced some calls on Julien's phone, sir. Mostly French numbers linked to debts, threats. One number repeats, a name tied to a known criminal network." Marchand's eyes narrowed. "And this girl? She's caught in it, sir. Whoever owns that number may know where she is, or will find her soon." He rose, pacing the office. The puzzle was bigger than a simple murder. It was a tangle of lies, manipulation, and human frailty. Claire's missing passport, Julien's betrayal, and the underworld debts all pointed towards someone still at large. Someone who had orchestrated pieces without being seen. Marchand felt the weight of justice pressing down. Every clue, every witness, every shred of paper mattered. He needed patience, strategy, and insight, because Paris didn't forgive mistakes, and neither did he. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the broken and the guilty. But inside the station, Marchand began to reconstruct the story, pulling threads, connecting dots, assembling a picture of human weakness, fear, and deception. The case was far from over. The streets of Paris were quiet that evening, wet from an earlier rain, the city slick with reflections of streetlights. Inspector Léon Marchand walked briskly along Rue des Abbesses, trenchcoat collar turned up, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Each step echoed against the buildings, a rhythm in the otherwise muted city. He had spent the day tracing Claire Reynolds' possible routes, Julien Moreau's connections, and the shadowed corners of Montmartre where the night had erupted in blood. Forensics reports confirmed what Marchand had already suspected. Julien had survived the alley attack, but barely. Claire's fingerprints were on the broken bottle. Her story of self-defense aligned with witness statements of screaming and chaos. Yet the question remained, where was Claire now? And what had she truly intended when she fled the alley? Marchand paused at a cafe corner, recalling the sequence of events. The stolen passport, the catacombs, the confrontation in the rain. Each piece fit into a puzzle of human error, fear, and vengeance. But he still lacked the critical piece. The link between Julien, the criminal network, and the girl who had vanished into the city. A call came through on his phone. Detective Morel's voice was tight. "Inspector, we've tracked Claire. She's at a small hotel near the Seine." "Alone?" Marchand's jaw tightened. "Any sign of Julien's associates?" "Negative, for now. But, sir," Morel hesitated. "There's someone watching her. CCTV picked up a man in a hood outside the hotel entrance, but he disappeared before officers arrived." Marchand felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. The case had shifted. It was no longer just about the alley, the stolen passport, or betrayal. It was about survival, and time was running out. He arrived at the hotel moments later. The receptionist, nervous and flustered, confirmed a reservation under Claire Reynolds' name. Marchand showed his badge and requested access. The elevator ride was silent, the hum of machinery filling the tense moments. At the 4th floor, he exited, eyes scanning the corridor. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and damp towels. The door to Claire's room was ajar. Marchand pushed gently, entering with caution. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, soaked from rain earlier, hair still damp, eyes wide with exhaustion. She looked up at him, fear and defiance mingling in her gaze. "Inspector Marchand," she said softly, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know where else to go." He stepped closer, careful not to startle her. "You did the right thing coming here. You're safe now." Claire shook her head. "Safe? After everything? After Julien? The passport? I don't know what I am." Marchand nodded, empathy threading through his disciplined demeanor. "Sometimes safety is just the first step. The rest, the truth, the consequences will follow. But you're not alone." Her eyes searched his, hesitation and fear warring with a fragile trust. "What about Julien? What happens to him?" "He's alive. He'll face the law, and so will those connected to him," Marchand said. "But what matters most now is that you're accounted for, and no one else can exploit you." Outside, the city moved on, indifferent, yet Marchand felt the tension begin to ease, a small victory against the chaos. The case wasn't entirely resolved. Criminals still lurked, secrets still simmered. But for now, justice had a foothold. Claire exhaled slowly, the first genuine breath of relief she had managed since Paris had turned into a nightmare. "I don't know how to thank you," Marchand offered a small, faint smile. Start by staying alive. The rest comes later. The rain had stopped entirely now, leaving the Seine shimmering under moonlight, reflections dancing like fragile promises. Outside, the city pulsed with life, oblivious to the trials of the alley, the catacombs, and the human failures that had transpired. Marchand glanced at Claire one last time before stepping into the corridor. The puzzle pieces had aligned for now. Justice had its chance, though the cost had been immense. The city breathed around them, quiet but alive, shadows still moving in corners. The night reminding all who walked it that darkness existed, and that light, however fragile, always followed.